Hi, I'm Dr. Gaby Cora, and welcome to my show, Dr. Gaby's Take, Make Life Interesting. Our theme for the week is stigma and bias. 1.2 million people are infected with the HIV virus in the United States, but only 4 out of 5 people know that they are infected, meaning 1 out of 5 doesn't know. And I know that a lot of what has to do with this is related to stigma and bias. And this is the reason why we're going to be talking about this topic today. Now, we deny what we fear, and denial and fear have a lot to do with reasons why we may have some preconceptions about certain things in a positive or negative way, and that's what bias means, which would then lead us into creating some stigma around certain things. So, for example, some of the reasons in which stigma affects us include mental health issues. There continues to be the stigma about mental health where many people are even reluctant to even consider that they may be depressed and seek help. Sometimes it may be because some people around them may say, just get it over with, snap out of it. So people may feel a little bit less open about seeking help. Another huge area around stigma has a lot to do with abusing drugs, and or anything that is taboo, such as sex. Anything that has to do with being gay or being bisexual or having some different preferences continues to bring about tons of bias and stigma. Just another example, domestic violence and or physical or sexual abuse continue to have quite a bit of bias, stigma, denial, and fear around these topics. A second point is, why does stigma even exist? Well, the first reason is just plain ignorance. We don't know. And sometimes we just assume certain things, more so when we're surrounded by people who assume certain things and then teach us what they think they know. The second point is lack of experience. For example, when I was working at the National Institutes of Health, I had a very prestigious colleague working with us, and he shared with me how he had moved from the Midwest. Well, you know, he was in his 20s and he had still never seen anyone who was not white. And it wasn't until he moved to the DC area that he was first exposed to someone who was African American. So his behavior was a little bit odd around people who were African American. Not that it was meaningfully racist in any shape or form. He had just not had the experience of being around people from other countries or from other cultures, even from within his own country. He had not been exposed to many people of other races or ethnicities. Now, the third point is, what are the common biases that may affect our own success? And the first one is related to stereotypes. So stereotypes could include age issues, race issues, gender issues. But the important thing is, how are we operating under our own biases? So for example, if as a woman, I thought that because I'm in my 40s and because I'm a woman, I cannot have access to certain leadership positions, I may be right in my observations because I may not see that many people in my same age group and my same gender may be occupying certain positions. But on the other hand, I'm really limiting my own success by having some preconceptions about what a leader should look like. Okay? That's one very important point. The second point is having this lack of awareness of how my own biases are impacting upon my own choices, my own decisions. So for example, if I thought that medical school was too hard, because I wasn't as smart as some other people that I knew that were going into medical school, but I really had a passion for it, but I didn't operate on it because I didn't think that I was going to be smart enough to do it, then my own bias would have also limited my ability to succeed. And the third, which is one of the most important ones, is silence. What are the secrets that we keep from the outside world to try to protect us from being misperceived or judged? The interesting thing about this is that although we may be leading a double life, at the end of the day, the ones who keep silent and the ones who really judge ourselves are ourselves. And this is one of the most important concepts around bias, stigma, denial, and fear. Join me in the next interview with Juan Carlos Riascos. Juan Carlos is an inspiration to so many of us as he's overcome huge issues around stigma, bias, life, and death. He addressed and faced a devastating situation that changed his life and changed his future. And as an economist, he shifted his life into becoming an educator and helping thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and millions of people by destigmatizing HIV and AIDS. Join me in this upcoming interview with Juan Carlos and enjoy. I'm so honored to introduce you to Juan Carlos Riascos. Juan Carlos and I met actually on a flight from Miami to LA. We had a 5-hour conversation, and you'll see why we chatted so much. Juan Carlos, thank you for coming.
Happy to be here.
Juan Carlos, tell us a little bit of your story.
Again, a little of my story. How can I summarize 20 years of living with HIV in 2 minutes? Well, you know, my background, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a doctor, I'm an economist. And I get to learn about this disease, about HIV, the hard way, or the hardest way, which is when it hits home. And that was 20 years ago. And it hit not only me personally, but also my wife and our baby daughter. That's how I got to learn about this disease. And it was probably the worst tragedy that could ever happen to a family. But that was it, and there was no way back. Very sad moments, and real quick telling you how it happened. You know, after our daughter was born, my wife Margarita, she was losing energy, she was not feeling okay. We decided to go and see a doctor. She had all the kinds of lab tests done, and they were looking for leukemia, lupus, cancer, you name it. She had everything. We went back to the doctor, and everything was perfect. We were very happy, ready to leave the practice, and we were told, hold on a second, I'm going to have to request one more test. So we look back and says, what is it? And the doctor says, well, I don't like Margarita's white blood cell count and red blood cell count. There's something here that I don't like, so I'm going to have to request the ELISA test. When we heard the ELISA test, I remember very well, what does my mother-in-law has to do with this? Her name is Eliza. And we laughed, and the doctor was very serious. He said, I'm sorry, but this is a very serious matter. So we said, well, what is it? The ELISA test is actually the first test that is given to find out if someone has been exposed to HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, the virus that causes AIDS. So we were shocked. But finally we said, you know, there has to be some type of mistake, or this is kind of a bad joke. However, we signed the request. Margarita had the test done. It was not like nowadays that it takes only 20 minutes to get a result. Back then, 20 years ago, it would take about a week or 10 days. We waited those days. We went back to the doctor, and he gave us the bad news that the test had come positive. And I remember saying, positive to what? Hello, positive to HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. And not only that, I'm going to have, I remember very well, like if it was yesterday, the doctor telling me, And if your wife, if her test has been positive, I'm going to have to request a test for you and your baby daughter. So I said, well, this is kind of a bad joke, nightmare. Let's see what happened, because there has to be some type of mistake. The three of us got tested. We waited the longest days in our lives. We went back. And honestly, we were absolutely thinking that they were going to tell us, you know, forget about it, everything is negative, go back to your lives. But it wasn't. They gave us actually the worst news that could ever happen to a family, and it was wife, dad, mom, dad, and the baby daughter positive to HIV 20 years ago.
This had been so different from your upbringing, from the life you were having, enjoying yourselves, having a great time, and then all of a sudden, this was a huge shift.
Facing actually the worst disease, the dreadiest disease ever in human history. And so it was very sad, it was very painful, and I actually asked for, you know, to take the test again, get retested and retested. And says, well, now let's go here, let's go somewhere else, because probably it's the lab, you know, that's doing something must be wrong.
The denial, it's impossible.
It is impossible that this is happening to us. And especially we're thinking that because of all the misinformation that we were reading in the newspapers, or the little information we were able to get on TV. And but the reality was that each time the test came back positive, positive, positive. So we really had to go through the process, the different stages of grief, shock, denial, bargaining, isolation, depression, until we came to acceptance.
And some of these came back over time. Your first wife becoming ill, her passing away, then knowing that your little one was also very sick at a certain point in time, taking care of her and not knowing if she was going to survive.
There you go. Very difficult times. It was a very difficult journey. The first, we were diagnosed in 1991. The next 2 years, my wife and I, we didn't play the blame type of game that most people were playing. No, I mean, it's human nature. You know, this is happening in a couple, and most people, you know, they start blaming. It was you, it was me, and we knew that that wasn't the case. There was no way of, you know, no need to blame, but to move forward. And at the time, we had choices: either play the victims and see the consequences. Most people who play the victims, they died, unfortunately, or to fight. And we decided to fight, especially because we had the responsibility of our baby daughter. And that's exactly what we did. Unfortunately, Margarita developed full-blown AIDS, you know, very rapidly, and 2 years later, she passed away in Miami, Florida.
The interesting thing that you also always mention is how differently you can be affected by the virus. The effects of the virus on her were different than on you, and were different on your little one.
Right.
What was that?
Well, HIV, one of the reasons why in 2011 we still don't have a cure is because HIV is a highly complex virus, and it mutates, and genetics plays a very significant role in this process. So you could be infected with the same 2 individuals or 3 individuals, whatever number of individuals, they could be infected with the same strain of the virus, but it's not going to happen the same. I mean, they're not going to have the same symptoms. So genetics, the environment, nutrition, your past history plays a very important role. And so that's one of the reasons why we see that some people, they get sick, even though they're taking antiretrovirals, they actually get sick very rapidly. And some other people that they don't get it. They don't get any symptoms. And even there's some people which is called slow progressors. They never take medications. I know people that they've been HIV positive for over a quarter of a century, 25 years, and they have never had the need to take antiretrovirals.
So there's so many differences, and at the same time there's so many myths that you may have encountered from the very beginning, and obviously you've self-educated and then you've made your life of educating other people. But what are the most common myths that you think affect us?
Well, if we go back, if we take a look and see, okay, what are the roots of HIV stigma? What I can see is there was a paradigm 30 years ago. HIV/AIDS was equals to sex and drugs, which was equals to sins, people, sinners, and then which was equal to death. So then people, they made the connection between the disease and death because there was sex and drugs and rock and roll in between, and people, especially at the time, as you well know, it wasn't even called 30 years ago AIDS. It was called GRID, gay-related immunodisease, because the scientific community thought that it was actually happening only within the gay population. But that has changed. That has shifted long time ago. We know that more and more women are getting infected with the virus. Not only that, worldwide, every minute, 6 adolescents, they get infected with HIV, starting their sexual life. Of those 6 adolescents, 4 are girls, 2 are boys. So it's really a shift. However, the connection between the disease and the gay community still, it's very much alive. And that is something that we still have to educate the people, because more and more heterosexuals are getting infected because they just think this has nothing to do with our sex life. This is only happening still within the gay community, and guess what? That is not the case.
So anyone can be infected unless we use prevention.
There you go.
And that's the important thing for us to realize. There's different ways in which we can prevent from becoming, from having the virus.
There you go. Remember that this is a disease that is 100% preventable. Something that we really need to understand as well is, well, first of all, education. Education is key. But something that we need to have clear, very clear, is that this is not an airborne disease. This is strictly blood-borne disease, which makes a big difference. It is not that easy to get infected with HIV, as you may think. People many years ago, and still even now, we see stigma is alive, unfortunately, but many years ago, people, they didn't want to shake hands or hug someone, nothing like that. We know that those are myths. Or what I could tell, even, the whole idea of someone being HIV positive and having a healthy sexual relationship with any other individual who is not HIV positive, that was unheard. Nowadays, thanks to the clinical research, thanks to medication, as long as people take their medications, as long as their viral load is undetectable, we need to have clear that there's no cure yet. Eventually, and I hope, and I'm very optimistic, there's going to be a cure. But if you get infected with HIV, we know that it's going to be until there is a cure or something else. So people, they just need to take precautions. And the precautions, the number one precaution is, using condoms and safer sex.
Which brings us to this taboo and stigma of even talking openly about sex, and some people, even people who are very religious and still wonder whether or not they should use condoms for,
there you go.
So all of this makes us think quite a bit. You've also shared with me that people get really surprised when they know that you remarried.
There you go. Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, there's something interesting because, and it happens, I'm sure that it's not only happening to me, but also to most people who are actually working to fight this disease. And it's because there are 3 different types of stigma. Stigma by itself, which is this cluster of negative attitudes out of fear and rejection. But there is also self-stigma, those people living with the disease that they feel worthless and that shouldn't be the case. But then there's stigma by association, and it's because, you're a doctor who is an HIV specialist, it's because either you are infected or you are gay or something happened. And it happens to everybody. Even if you're a doctor, a pharmacist, or just a health educator. The fact that I'm educating the people about this disease, the first thing that comes to, when I disclose that I'm HIV positive, the first thing that comes to, most people's mind is, he's gay. Or he's bisexual. Or,
he must have done drugs.
Or he must have done, he must have done drugs. Those types of things. And it's very sad that 30 years later, people are still thinking that first.
This is very interesting. During part of my training, I graduated as a doctor about 22 years ago. And one of the interesting things that happened was that sometimes when we were chatting with an HIV patient, we may have wanted to know how they may have contracted the virus, just because we wanted to see if they were exposed to some other potential diseases as well. However, sometimes within the medical community, you could still see when some of my colleagues would ask just because they're curious.
There you go.
And not necessarily because they really want to put it within the case. So, as someone from the medical community, we have, in a way, continued to facilitate that stigma to still occur, rather than dispel the myths and go like...
No, I understand your point, and unfortunately it's happening, and still happening every day, not only within the medical establishment. One of the, for individuals living with HIV, that they need, there's plenty of resources where they can actually get help, right? So the first thing is to get tested. Once you know your diagnosis, you know that there's a wealth of resources that you can go.
This is very expensive medication. So the hard part on one end is we do need to have access to that medication consistently, because that consistency is going to be key in the treatment. It's not like you can start it for a month and then not take it for 2 weeks, right?
Absolutely. No, this is for the rest of your life. It's such an important commitment, because not everybody who is HIV positive is ready to make that commitment. One of the biggest challenges that we're seeing right now is that some people, they actually start treatment, they feel better, and they stop. And that's the worst thing that could ever happen, because then you will create resistance to other HIV medication. And the good thing is that even insurance companies, they cannot deny you also antiretrovirals. If you have insurance, they will pay for those medications. But if you don't have insurance, you don't have to worry. You just need to, file a form and look for that help, and you'll get it.
And how would people have access to that form?
Well, actually, you go to your local clinic or to your local health department, and they will give you all the information.
We have about 1.2 million people in the United States who are HIV positive, but only 1 out of 5 doesn't know that he or she may be infected. What do you think keeps people from even getting tested?
Stigma. Unfortunately, I would say, because there's huge campaigns all over the country about testing. We need to get people, we want people to get tested. It is important to get to know your status.
So is it thinking, I'm sure that I'm okay?
Yeah. But the problem again is that many people said, okay, why would I like to know that I'm HIV positive if there is such a huge stigma and discrimination? Remember that stigma and discriminations violates every human right. The right to health, the right to work, the right to live. So people, they said, okay, here's, I can get tested, however, there's this, huge misperception about this disease. And no one should be dying of AIDS in the United States. Unfortunately, if you go to every single hospital, there's always someone dying of AIDS. But they're not dying because of the disease itself. They're dying of the worst opportunistic infection that they could have. That is the social opportunistic infection, the stigma of the disease.
Tell me a bit more about the stigma. for the disease? What have you seen in your work throughout all these years, and maybe even a shift in terms of the stigma from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or what you see now?
Well, as an economist, and sometimes I like to play with charts, I keep saying, okay, 1981, when this whole thing started, let's do a graph looking for research and development. So it's an upward trend from no medication whatsoever 30 years ago to over 30 different types of combinations, medications and combinations. That is wonderful, major breakthroughs, right? And then the other curve, it'll be the stigma, which was very high in the x-axis, and it should have been going down as we learn more about the disease, right? Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. The curve has had a very slow downturn and then almost stagnated because people are still as ignorant, not as 30 years ago, but probably as 20 years ago.
So do you think the stigma is kind of the same among age groups, or do you see a difference in the way that this stigma, the curve, like you were mentioning, it's plateaued, but is there any difference in the perception from the different generations, gender?
My personal experience is in actually educating so many audiences all over the country has been that the older generations, for older generations, it's more difficult to understand and to actually get to learn and see the disease in another way.
So the myths are more ingrained.
Exactly, with all the generations. And also, but I see the big difference with the younger crowd, kids, adolescents, and the young people in their 20s. They know more about the disease than their parents do, which is good. That is something that that's something that really gives me energy to keep on educating. However, another big problem is, okay, many kids, there's some type of fatigue about this disease. We've been talking about HIV/AIDS for the past 30 years. For many years, there was all these huge educational campaigns. Hollywood was helping, actually, all these celebrities they were helping to educate people. But then it has been like some type of fatigue. It's like, there's nothing else, there's nothing new. And that is very unfortunate because still the numbers of individuals infected in the United States, last year there were over 55,000 people infected, and the trend still is the same. People are getting infected as we speak, which is very sad.
And more people are getting infected too, and there may have been even some shifts, some demographic shifts about the infections.
And especially here in the United States, we've seen a big shift toward the heterosexual community, especially African American community and the Latino community. Big change. And within the country, African Americans have been disproportionately affected. It's like 52% of new cases are among African Americans. And then Latinos, we're coming next.
What do you foresee in the future, Juan Carlos? What do you see?
Well, the only way that I can see that, I am very optimistic, and I know that science is working day and night, 365 days a year, to actually find a cure and or a vaccine. So I do foresee a cure. And but in order to get to that cure, we also need to cure the social opportunistic infection that I told you. That's one of the reasons why I say, and I have a call for every single individual, is to become a social architect or a social engineer and do the best you can in order to have a better world. A world without AIDS, a world without stigma.
We can eradicate AIDS. We can eradicate AIDS and its stigma.
Well, we've done it with other diseases. I don't see why not. So I'm very optimistic that eventually we'll, it's going to take probably 10, 20, 30 years, who knows.
But it's feasible.
But it's feasible. I do believe that it's feasible.
So some myths and truths. One of the myths is if a woman is infected with a virus, if she delivers a baby, the baby will be infected too.
That's not true.
That's not true.
No. That baby, if she has access to care and treatment, that baby will be born negative.
So she would need to treat herself during the pregnancy. There should be special treatment during the delivery, and she may not be able to breastfeed after the delivery.
That's right.
As we're protecting the kids. Let's go to another myth, okay? HIV is a disease of gays.
That is no longer the case. And here we have seen a significant shift of the epidemic. As I said earlier, every minute there are 6 adolescents getting infected with this disease. Of those 6 adolescents, 4 are girls, 2 are boys. So there's a big change. Also, more and more women are getting infected with the disease. Now our biggest challenge here is also, women. If HIV is a sexually transmitted disease, we have to understand that we are sexual human beings. So we really need to understand, how this virus works. And as long as we are sexual individuals, as long as we are sexually active, there's always a risk to get infected.
Is there any other myth that we haven't discussed that you would like to dispel?
Well, the list is like, yes, you can shake hands, you can have casual kissing, you can get married with someone. Even if you're not HIV positive, you can actually have a perfectly healthy relationship with someone who is HIV positive. And more we are seeing zero discordant couples, where one of the couples is HIV positive and the other person is not. And the good thing, like in my case, my wife, she's HIV negative. We've been happily married for the past 15 years, and Margarita, she's still HIV negative. And we haven't done wonders or changed things. It's precaution and safer sex.
Juan Carlos, anything else that you'd like to add for our viewers today?
The last thing that I would like to add for those infected with HIV is that HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. But for my daughter, for my family, and for myself, we have a different definition. And it is, hope is vital. Believe me, there is hope to live with HIV.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you for watching the show. I hope you enjoyed Juan Carlos Riascos as much as I did. It has been such a pleasure meeting him and interviewing him for my show as well. Now, let's think about 3 things that could help us make life interesting, according to this show that we've just seen around stigma, around bias, but also around hope and around turning things around and around learning more things that can help us make life interesting. The first one is, think about what biases are keeping you from success. What are the biases? What are your own limiting beliefs that are keeping you from succeeding? The first one is, do you feel that you're keeping dangerous secrets from the outside world and even worse, from yourself? So are you in a way living a double life that's not allowing you to be your true self, your authentic self, in a very aligned and integrated way? Think about that. Become more aware of that. The second one, within this first point about the biases, includes, do you feel that you're living part of this double life because of fear that you're going to come out, or that people are going to discover that you're not authentic? So this could also be contributing to your own bias. And another point to think about in this area is, do you sometimes feel like an imposter? Like the outside world, for example, sees you as extremely successful, but you don't feel that way on the inside. So all of that can help you around your own bias. The second point here is, how can you manage this bias that you may have and feel more comfortable in your own skin? And the three key points within this management piece include increasing your own awareness. So many times people don't realize that they may be their worst enemies, but here you do have an opportunity to try to figure out what are your own biases? Who are the people that you distinctively try to leave aside? The people that you dislike? Is it a religious group? Is it a race? Is it a certain ethnic background that you tend to dislike? So try to figure out yourself who it is that you tend to be biased against. The second point that is very important about managing our bias is becoming more educated. So for years ago, I was in touch with someone who was a senior to me while I was training, and this guy was from the Midwest. He was a very nice guy, well prepared, well studied, but in his upbringing, he had never ever seen an African American person. So he felt very stiff around people who were African American, and it's not like he mistreated them or that he was racist in any shape or form. He just didn't have the experience. So a couple of things around this. By increasing your education about a certain area, whether it's religion or whether it's a race or an ethnic background, and or allowing yourself to have more of that experience, that can help you manage the bias in a better way. The third point here is watching the company that you keep. So for example, if you feel that you are quite open, but you tend to surround yourself with people who are constantly judging other people or criticizing other people for certain aspects, and it could be just because they may not like fat people, or they may not like white people, or they may not like Asian people. Try to see if you're surrounding yourself by people who are constantly criticizing and or judging other people. The second part here is try to see if how authentic you are around these other people as well. So for example, sometimes to keep up with these friends, you may need to say jokes or act a certain way when you're with them, but you act a very different way when you're on your own. So watch that in terms of your own behavior to see how the company that you keep is also affecting you. And a third point is to really do some introspection and see how much you're judging or you're criticizing other people, because you may feel that you're quite open, but if you're constantly surrounding yourself with people who are overly critical or over judgmental, in general what you see is that mirror image. What is within is being expressed or sought after on the outside. So all of this is food for thought. Think about these points. See how you can become aware, how you can improve on a step-by-step basis, and allow yourself to continue to improve and make life interesting. Enjoy.